Right now, our heads of states are meeting in Arusha in Tanzania. You know who the main sponsors of that conference are? The Nordic Institute. How can it be that you want integration and somebody is paying for your unity? Do you think there is free lunch? Do you think there is any good Samaritans? No, even here. I want you to look at some of the sponsors. Open Society, Royal Wallenberg Institute, and others. Ford Foundation. You can never, ever become independent when 60 years after independence, little European organizations are still funding your being here. Little organizations. And if you ask very keenly, the Royal Wallenberg Institute has given you not more than $100,000. Not more. And your proceedings here will go to the Royal Wallenberg Institute at Lund University in Sweden. They know everything that you are doing. You cannot run an organization that way. We who are here, we are lawyers and we are talking about East African integration. We have been in existence, I'm told, for 25 years. What have we done beyond the meetings that we attend every year? Even on a simple question like cross-border practice, we come here and we promise ourselves, then we are the very same who are here. You go to Uganda unasema wa Kenya si wataki hapa. You go to Uganda, Kenya, and you say wa Tanzania si wataki. You go to Rwanda, you say you don't want Burundians, lawyers. We have all sinned and fallen short of the expectations of our countries, and the East African community is not going to thrive until the day that we ourselves begin to make decisions that are going to help us. So I want to hear, as we talk about the missteps and the opportunities, there is an opportunity to liberate ourselves as East African community. Those were the good old days. But the old days did not last long, and we started crumbling. And one of the reasons why we were crumbling is because the politics was getting a little bit more toxic. And when Idi Amin overthrows Obote in 1971, we are now on a race to the bottom. And we raced well and we arrived at the very bottom. With the collapse of the East African community in 1977, some attribute it to politics, and I agree, and some also attribute it to what is known as the Nairobi mentality. The Nairobi mentality was the discernible arrogance of the Kenyan government, and the manner in which it thought it was the big brother at a time when ideologically it was not clear on many issues, including the apartheid regime in South Africa. But that history is known to all of us.
Hello everybody, welcome once again to AfriPost. I believe wherever you're watching us from, you are doing great. Now, there is this question about African integration, and it has been talked about widely by many scholars in our continent. One of our notable exports to the African countries here in Kenya is Professor PLO Lumumba. This is a great African kid. He's a great African, I can dare say, because his vision and his act of calling for African integration at every opportunity that he gets has really sensitized some people to think there is no need for Africa having these different borders. Because as I've always said in this channel, the question about Africa is something that Africans must be told, because there are a lot of lies out there. You know, like for me, I'm Kenyan. When you look at yourself as a Kenyan, you think you're better than a Nigerian. You're better than a Ugandan. Or if you're a Tanzanian, you think you're better than a Rwandese. You're better than a Burundi. You're better than a Congolese. You get that? You're better than a South African. You see that? A South African will say, I'm better than a Nigerian. I'm better than a Zimbabwean. You get that? So this question about which country is greater, better, whatnot, let's throw that in the rubbish, because Africa in itself, it is a continent of a united people. And we know the calls of United States of Africa and how that call has faced a lot of trouble. One of the casualty that is known is Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi faced a lot of opposition just because of his call for Africa to be united and to avoid using the dollar as their exchange currency. Here is PLO Lumumba that I want to talk about in this video.
Let me do what the Nigerians do to say that I stand on the already established protocols. In that way, I do not annoy anybody, save that I must say how humbled and glad I am to be invited here to share my thoughts with you. What I've done is to write a fairly disciplined article on the subject, and you will have the occasion to read and appreciate it in its full flavor at a later date. I've been asked to speak about the East African community. This is a body, as you know, that was initially established in 1967. We know that it collapsed in the year 1977. We know that it was revived in the year 2000. We know that it initially comprised Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. We know that we admitted Rwanda and Burundi in 2007. We know that we admitted South Sudan in 2016. We know that we admitted the Democratic Republic of Congo in the year 2022. That is the organization that we want to talk about in order to ask ourselves certain critical and sometimes painful questions as we look to the future of the East African community. It is always wise to contextualize the history of an organization in history. And I remember so very well, courtesy of history, that in the year 1960, the then leading proponent for independence of Tanganyika then, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, attended a meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and he proposed that Tanganyika delays our independence, that Kenya, Uganda, and Tanganyika regain independence as one country. And his argument was, we have been so very divided after Berlin that it makes sense that when we emerge from the colonial domination, we are one, that we may become strong against the diabolical machinations of the former colonizer turned neo-colonizer. Nobody listened to Nyerere then, and Tanganyika then regained our independence in 1961, Uganda in 1962, and Kenya in 1963. You'll also remember at that time that the world was unipolar or indeed bipolar at that time, with the emergence of the Soviet Union and the new hegemon in the bloc, the United States of America. This history is important to help us appreciate where we ultimately found ourselves. We inherited institutions that were not designed to benefit the post-independence African countries. The East African Common Services Board was a creation of the British colonizers, and it was designed to help their economic exploits. We merely inherited them. The architecture did not take into account the post-colonial state. And many of you who are here will remember that indeed the post-colonial state was never meant to succeed. And even as I speak, it is not meant, and they are not meant to succeed. They are meant to collapse so that they can be dominated. It is in that context that you must understand the institutions that we inherited. Be that as it may, in 1967 we created the East African Community, the three heads of the then East African countries, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Paulo Milton Obote, and Jomo Kenyatta. And we inherited institutions that controlled many of the vital institutions, East African railways and harbors, the postal institutions. The university was one, the University of East Africa with constituent colleges. The curriculum was one, the currency was one. That is what we inherited. But no sooner had we settled down than we became the target of manipulation and attack. And many of you who are students of history will remember the choice was either we gravitated towards our colonizers, complete with a reorganized commonwealth of independent nations. It was not. Because although it was referred to as Commonwealth of Independent Nations, it must never be lost on us that the British monarch became the titular head. It must not be lost on us that it was headquartered in London and remains headquartered in London with a DNA that is still neo-colonial. We must never forget that. So that when we regained independence, there was a struggle, almost a headwind immediately, whose agenda was to torpedo the success of a unified East African community. And the politics of the day was also taking a different trajectory. In Tanzania, Mwalimu Nyerere, who was a little bit more ideological than the rest of his colleagues, was already moving to the left with the Arusha Declaration. Obote in 1969 with the Common Man's Charter was also moving to the left in 1969. Kenyans were lukewarm, but we were moving also to the left with our session of paper number 10 of 1965. So ideologically, we appeared to be moving in the same direction, and our institutions were working. I want you to look back then. Today, when I look at the board of sponsors, I see East African or Kenya Airways, divided institutions. Then we have the East African Airways. There are some of you here who sat the East African Certificate of Education, one examination. There were some here who went to the University of Dar es Salaam. Those were the good old days. But the old days did not last long. And we started crumbling. And one of the reasons why we were crumbling is because the politics was getting a little bit more toxic. And when Idi Amin overthrows Obote in 1971, we are now on a race to the bottom. And we raced well and we arrived at the very bottom with the collapse of the East African community in 1977. Some attribute it to politics, and I agree. And some also attribute it to what is known as the Nairobi mentality. The Nairobi mentality was the discernible arrogance of the Kenyan government and the manner in which it thought it was the big brother at a time when ideologically it was not clear on many issues, including the apartheid regime in South Africa. But that history is known to all of us, and wisdom dictates that I do not dwell on it for too long, save to point out that the East African community collapsed. And we had to go back to the beginning to ask ourselves whether we were better served with a cooperation that was going to ensure that we create bigger markets. But let us go back to history once again. Because in the context of Africa, there were also a number of things that were happening, which were beginning to tell us that integration is the only way of immunizing ourselves against many problems, whether they are economic, social, or political. Those of you who are students of history will remember that at that time, the African countries were already grappling with the question of whether we should have a united Africa. You remember the meetings held in 1958 in Ghana at the behest of Nkrumah. You remember the meetings held in Casablanca, Morocco in 1961 at the behest of King Hassan of Morocco. You remember the meeting held in Monrovia in 1961, which gave birth to the Monrovia Group. And ultimately, you remember the meeting held on the 23rd through to the 25th days of May in 1963, which brought about the Organization of African Unity. We say this, that we must remind ourselves that Africa has never forgotten that the only way in which she can realize our potential was through unity. And that unity was seen from two different perspectives continentally. Continentally, there were two groups, which you know. The Monrovia group, to which Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere belonged, which said, let us move regionally first. Let us have East African community, let us have SADC, which what we now know as SADC. Let us have ECOWAS, let us have Central Africa, let us have the Maghreb, and ultimately, this will become the building blocks upon which we will unify Africa. That was group number one, the Monrovia group. Group number two was the Casablanca group, led by Kwame Nkrumah, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Ahmed Ben Bella, and Modibo Keita, saying, let us unite now. Because if we don't unite now, the former colonizer, now neo-colonizer, is going to attack us, and we'll never unite. And if we don't unite, they like it that way because we are small and viable states, and they'll crush and dominate us. It is those ideas that once again, in the context of the East African community, emerged in 1999, and we came with the Treaty of 1999, East African Community Treaty, which then took effect in the year 2000. But this time round, the leaders, in their wisdom, took the view that the growth of the East African community ought to be incremental. And I invite you who are sitting here and are lawyers to look at Article 5.2 of the treaty, which says that this time round we are going to start with a customs union, then a common market, then a common currency, and then ultimately a political union. That is the process that we prescribe to ourselves as the way in which we would grow the East African community. But remember that even as we were doing this, and this is always the handiwork of bodies that dominate us. We are members of the Commonwealth and we call ourselves Anglophone. Others are members or speak French officially and they call themselves gleefully Francophone. We don't have the Lusophone. We never call ourselves Kiswahili phone. No, we don't. So that even mentally and intellectually we are divided in that fashion. It was not lost on me here. You are saying this is the first multilingual, almost gleefully. And there is nothing wrong with that. So we started with a new system saying we have a customs union. Remember, we are talking about progress, missteps, and opportunities and the future. The question is, on the question of customs union, what have we done? Do we have a union beyond the things that we are quick at signing? And there is no people in the world that are quick at signing things. Africans. We sign things which we honor and breach. Because if you have a customs union, there should be seamless trade between Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Do we have it? The answer is no, in reality. Do we have a common market? Do we have the same rules of origin? Is it still not difficult to get goods from Tanzania to Kenya? Do we still not argue about whether Ugandan milk should come to Kenya? These are the things that we must ask ourselves when we assemble in the manner in which we are today. Do we have the common airspace that we said we would? No, we don't. Do we have one telephone cord in East Africa? No, we don't. So that when I'm here, I'm on 257, Uganda 255, 256, 243. This is where we find ourselves. The net effect is that we remain divided despite our promises that we would move in that direction. So that being the case, in the year 2004, the heads of state of the then East African community made a decision that they were going to fast-track political union. Their argument was, if we allow ourselves to make these baby steps, customs union, common market, and then monetary union, and ultimately a political union, we will never reach where we were. So they said, let us fast-track it, the political union. And they appointed a committee headed by the Kenyan Fiscal Amos Tuako. And on the 26th of November, they came up with a document which said many things. These are some of the things that they said. That by the year 2005, we shall have a ministerial committee to ensure that we transition into a political union. They said in the year 2005, mark the years. In the year 2005, we shall have a new deputy secretary of the East African community. They said, they did not stop there. They went on and said, in the year 2005, we'll have a ministerial committee. They said that. Then they said in the year 2005, we'll appoint a committee to begin working on the constitution of East Africa. They said that. In the year 2005, they said that we'll free the air skies in East Africa. They said that. In the year 2007, they said we will have harmonized our primary and secondary school curriculum. They said in 2007. They said by the year 2008 we'll have a referendum on the constitution. They said that. And then they said that by the year 2010 we will have the president of East Africa. They said all that. You and me are here, none of them, none. That is how we are good at making promises to ourselves which we don't fulfill. In the intervening period, as I've already indicated, we invited Rwanda and Burundi. Having failed to fulfill all the 11 things that we promised ourselves as 3 countries. And we did not stop at inviting Rwanda and Burundi, no. We invited South Sudan, and we did not stop there. Last year we invited the Democratic Republic of Congo, the home of Patrice Lumumba. And we are not stopping there. We are inviting Somalia, I hope. By next year we'll have Somalia. The more the merrier, they say. That is East African community that we have. So you could see a major misstep with the process of trying to fast-track the East African community in the belief that East African community, politically unified, would become a body that would have the political environment in which it would thrive. But when you look at East African communities, some of the problems that we have is that we have no ideological clarity or clarity on what we want beyond the statements that we make. Let us look at a number of them. Right now, many African countries, including the East African community, cannot focus on their target because of our membership in multiple organizations. Tanzania today is a member of the East African community and a member of SADC. In other words, there are certain SADC things which binds her and which are not necessarily accepted within the East African community. So when Tanzania comes to the East African community, notwithstanding that she headquarters the East African community, she treats with circumspection lest she annoy SADC members. The Democratic Republic of Congo is also a member of SADC and a member of the Central African organizations. Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania are members of the Commonwealth. Rwanda and others are members of the former French-speaking countries, and I think they now are the chief executive. What they discuss there, we do not know. What we discuss at the Commonwealth, we do not know. Kenya has now signed AGOA. Uganda has been excluded from AGOA. On 15th of November this month, in Apia in Samoa, we have signed the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific and the EU. How many of us know that we signed it on 15th of November in Apia in Samoa, which is an extension of the Lomé Convention and the Cotonou Agreement? Confusions galore. Last week, our presidents were in Germany. In January, they'll be in Italy. They were recently in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. After that, they'll go to Sochi in Russia. After that, they'll go to Tokyo in Japan. After that, they'll go to Washington. After that, they'll go to Beijing in China. After that, they'll go to Istanbul in Turkey. That is the state in which we find ourselves, and all these weaken our organization as East African community and stands in the way of our unity politically, economically, and otherwise. You know, if I thought that we were close to integration, yesterday I realized, and those who traveled with me yesterday must agree with me. When we arrived at the airport in Bujumbura, We flew from Nairobi for 1 hour and 20 minutes. We spent 1 hour and 30 minutes trying to fill a form online in order to enter Burundi. You cannot talk of integration when you are doing that. I saw people from Europe spending 2 minutes and East Africans were stuck. How can you integrate when you are hosting an East African lawyers conference and your system has not been sensitized and the documents are completely in French, all of them? Monsieur le Président, how can we integrate when that is the situation? We cannot. These are the soft issues that we must begin to deal with. We are talking about movement of persons. I should come to Burundi with no passport except a document of identification. That is what integration is all about. If we don't do that, then all these things we are doing, these are mere jamborees without more. So we must, going forward, begin to make sure that we are moving in the direction of integration by allowing people to move. We must also move in the direction of easing communication. Today, I'm here in Bujumbura, but when I make a phone call to Nairobi, number one, currency. We have been talking about common currency, which we ought to have had in the year 2009. Kenya, shilling. Burundi, franc. Rwanda, franc. Tanzania, shilling. Uganda, shilling. South Sudan, dollar, is it pound? The Democratic Republic of Congo, amafaranga. And all these currencies are dependent on the dollar. Without the dollar, they are meaningless. If we want to integrate, that is the direction in which we should move. I'm talking about the opportunities now. Right now, our heads of states are meeting in Arusha in Tanzania. You know who the main sponsors of that conference are? The Nordic Institute. How can it be that you want integration and somebody is paying for your unity? Do you think there is free lunch? Do you think there is any good Samaritans? No, even here. I want you to look at some of the sponsors. Open Society, Royal Wallenberg Institute, and others. Ford Foundation. You can never, ever become independent when 60 years after independence, little European organizations are still funding your being here. Little organizations. And if you ask very keenly, the Royal Wallenberg Institute has given you not more than $100,000. Not more. And your proceedings here will go to the Royal Wallenberg Institute at Lund University in Sweden. They know everything that you are doing. You cannot run an organization that way. We who are here, we are lawyers and we are talking about East African integration. We have been in existence, I'm told, for 25 years. What have we done beyond the meetings that we attend every year? Even on a simple question like cross-border practice, we come here and we promise ourselves, then we are the very same who are here. You go to Uganda unasema wa Kenya si wataki hapa. You go to Uganda, Kenya, and you say wa Tanzania si wataki. You go to Rwanda, you say you don't want Burundians, lawyers. We have all sinned and fallen short of the expectations of our countries, and the East African community is not going to thrive until the day that we ourselves begin to make decisions that are going to help us. So I want to hear, as we talk about the missteps and the opportunities, there is an opportunity to liberate ourselves as East African community. You know, Tanzania is about 60 million, Kenya is about 55 million, Uganda is about 50 million, Rwanda is about 12 million, South Sudan is about 12 million, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the day they decide to count properly, they are about 100 million. In other words, we are talking about a market of nearly 250 million. And if you look at intra-African trade, on the rules of origin only, what are we doing in our pieces of legislation in order to have harmonized rules of origin? What are we doing in our pieces of legislation to have harmonized standardization? So that if there is milk in Burundi, that milk having been standardized in Burundi is good for all East African community. What are we doing? What are we doing to ensure that we do not have borders? Right now, the Democratic Republic of Congo, through their president, and the Democratic Republic of Congo is a member of the East African community. About 2 weeks ago, in a very poorly published statement, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo said that they will build a wall between themselves and Rwanda, 200 kilometers. Is that the spirit of East African community when we are building walls rather than bridges? Those of you who are from the DRC, Google it now. Etienne Tshisekedi says we'll build a 200-kilometer wall between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then you tell me we are integrated? We are not integrated. And this is not rocket science. They are just simple things that we must do. So, brothers and sisters of the East African community, of the East African Lawyers Association, we know where we came from. We came from a failed East African community whose dividends we knew. Those of you who are older will remember those beautiful days when you worked in Kasese and you are Kenyan. Those beautiful days when you worked in Mwadui near Shinyanga and you did not need any permit. You remember those days. You remember those days when we had East African Airways. You remember those days when the flies were truly, the skies were truly free. You remember those days. You remember those days when East African railways and harbors worked. You remember when we had a common postal association last year, and I received a letter that had been sent to me from Mwanza in Tanzania in the month of January. I received it in September in Nairobi, 9 months later. You remember those days. Today, when I want to move any item in Kenya efficiently, I use DHL, which is German. I use UPS. Even our postal system has collapsed. When I want to apply for a passport e-citizen, I'm running on a system which is controlled from Germany or France or the United States. When I want to make my passport, the passports are not printed by us. When we print our money, there is not a single African country that prints their money within the continent. Kenya used to do with the LaRue, who have now run away. When we want to print our ballot papers, we can't print them in our country. We either do it in Dubai or in Greece in the case of our country, and you have a Greek tragedy after it. That is the East African community that we have. Now the question is, what is the East African community that is possible? Because we must go beyond lamentation and ask ourselves, what are the possibilities? In the face of all those difficulties that we have, is there something good about unity? Yes. The former Secretary General of society doing in order to harmonize the pieces of legislation so that we domesticate, if the word domesticate is the right word, East African laws so that we have seamless transactions and we have a common customs union. When we talk about customs union, we must also have excise duty, and I want you to observe now the difficulties. Uganda is now moving away from the port of Mombasa. They are annoyed with us. They are moving to the port of Dar es Salaam. Is that how we want to integrate? We had something called LAPSET, which was going to cover that part of eastern Kenya, bring us to Uganda, and ultimately to South Sudan and eastern Congo. LAPSET is in comatose. It is in comatose because the Tanzanians and the Ugandans have not moved the pipeline to this side. Kenya is getting isolated by the day. Is that how we want to ensure that we move in the right direction? So a common market is another thing that we must do. The third thing that we must do is to allow people to move, as I said a little earlier. All these difficulties, all these questions that we are asked in Rwanda, in Bujumbura, in Tanzania. How many days do you want to stay in Bujumbura? Which hotel are you staying at in Bujumbura? What has brought you to Bujumbura? I've come home. Let us eliminate all these things. And let me tell you, there is this misguided belief by the political class that if you open your borders, everybody will come to Bujumbura or to Nairobi. It will not happen. People will only come when they have something to do. We must enable people to move across the countries. Europe is doing that. And you can see what it's doing to their economies, Europe. They don't like each other, but they have discovered that there is a unity of purpose. They pretend to like it. You think the Germans like the French? You think the Italians like the Spaniards? They don't. You think the Slovenes love the Dutch? No, they don't. But they have discovered that unity is something that is good. Then ultimately we may have a political union. That political union is what is going to kill this narrow ethnic politics that is emerging in many East African countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, well, what do I see when I look to the future? When I look to the future, I see difficult times. I see attempts to destroy East African community. And this is how it's going to happen. And I pray I'm wrong. You are going to see Britain, which is more aggressive because it has left the Union. A Britain which is going to persuade Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, which are former colonies, we belong to the Commonwealth. We are one. Don't listen to them. They are lying. We are not one. I see European Union which is going to be more aggressive. And they will not want to work with us as East African community. They are going to work with us bilaterally. They are going to come to Burundi and sign a bilateral. I see a United States of America that is going to come with AGOA and tell Rwanda, you are the best in the region. Ignore Kenya. I see a Belgium that is going to be more aggressive in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Telling Congo, we come a long way. You did not come a long way in peace. It was exploitation. Don't listen to them. You are going to see China, which is going to come and tell you, we never colonized you. They are going to tell Tanzania, we built Tazara for you, we love you. No, they don't love you. You are going to see Turkey. You are going to see Germany. And they came to Tanzania through their president. They are going to apologize for the atrocities that they came. They are going to remind you, remember, before the British took you over, we are the ones who colonized you. They are going to say so. Don't listen to them. What we must listen to is that we are stronger in East African community if we work as one. Let us negotiate AGOA as one. Let us negotiate with European Union as one. Let us negotiate with China as one. What little things the Burundians want to do, they can negotiate it within East African community. If we do that, we'll make and give meaning to these words with which I conclude. The word that was spoken by Tanzania's Julius Kambarage Nyerere on the 6th day of March 1997 in Accra, Ghana, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Ghana's independence. This is what Mwalimu said. Unity is significant because when the world deals with Africa, the world does not care about their Congo-ness. The world does not care about their Tanzania-ness or Uganda-ness or their Kenya-ness or South Sudan-ness. The world cares about what they are doing and they deal with Africa as if it were monolithical. They love it that way because in our weak and undivided states, we are easy to manipulate and to dominate. I urge all of us today, Mwalimu said, to embrace unity, not because unity will solve all our problems, unity will not, but it will give us a united voice and it will enable Africa to be listened to and to be respected, and it is on the cusp of unity that Africa is going to realize her diplomatic strength, her economic strength, and our political strength. I look forward to the future, look forward to the days when that will happen, and when this society will cease to be an annual jamboree, but it will be a union where we are practicing one day in Bujumbura, another day in Kigali in Rwanda, another day in Kinshasa, another day in Juba, another day in Kampala, another day in Nairobi, Kenya. I look forward to those days. God bless.
PLO Lumumba is kind of giving us context and the truth about our history as Africans. And in one aspect, while talking about the need for African integration, he said that one of the main reasons why our independence did not bring a united Africa is because of selfishness and rudeness and ignorance of some of our independence leaders. One critical example is the question about the East African community. They are kind of calling for regional integration and to have a common market, because the benefit of having a common market is that if you combine the population of those countries, you realize that it will be a bigger market. But then there is this problem, and this is what has fought African integration for many years. The problem of big brother, or somebody who feels like they are better than another, or one country thinking that it can offer solution to other countries. So PLO Lumumba was kind of giving us context, because in 1967, at the formation of East African Community, there was a prior call by people like Julius Kambarage Nyerere to have an East African community that is a country, a block, so that Tanzania would not go as Tanzania, Kenya would not go as Kenya, Uganda would not go as Uganda. Now, you've listened to PLO Lumumba, and I think with that historical context that Lumumba is kind of giving us, it really shows you the level of incompetence that some of our independence leaders had, because it seems that they were under control of the Western powers. You know that one of the strategies that the Western powers have to ensure that they continue controlling Africa is to constantly and continuously put Africa in conflict state, where they ensure you do not come together at all means. In fact, if it is a country of many tribes, they will bring ethnic chaos in that country, and this will bring problems. If it is country and its neighbors, it will bring issues. And this happens specifically to countries with huge resources. Look at Nigeria. The question of Boko Haram continues to puzzle me to date. The kind of atrocities that these terrorist organizations have done in Nigeria, it's unspeakable for me. And then again, these things are condoned because they are leaders who have been specifically chosen and supported by Western countries to have control of that country. So these leaders remain to be their puppets. Look at Congo right now. There is this conflict that is not spoken about in Congo. People are fighting all over. But Congo is one of the countries that is richest in terms of natural resources. Why are people fighting there? That the country remains very poor, yet when it comes to grading by the kind of natural resources that countries have, Congo is one of the richest. So it only comes that these people should come together and then work towards ensuring that those resources benefit them. But because the leaders we have there are people who do not have the interest of that country at heart, they continue engaging in conflicts. And if it is not even instigated locally, there are people or terrorist organizations that are supported from outside. So that is something that must be noted. Look at the Sahel region. It took coup leaders to come and depose puppet leaders who they thought were in cahoots with the Western powers to steal resources from their countries. Look at Burkina Faso. Look at Niger, a country that is exporting uranium, something that is very important when it comes to nuclear power production. Look at Burkina Faso, a country that is rich in gold. Why are conflicts continuously there? Look at those countries, some of countries that produce oil. Look at Libya. It is in constant chaos because of the kind of resources it has. So this is something that all Africans must always be very wary about. Before we go supporting and championing for Western powers to have control over us, we must remember that they have held us on chokehold for quite some time. And as PLO Lumumba puts it, ignorance and arrogance should not be there for African leaders. Let us embrace each other and understand that united we stand, divided we fall. That is it from me today. Please remember to subscribe to this channel, like this video and share so that we have a huge community engaging on these African issues. We love you. Until next time, take care. Bye.